I was asked to do a version of the presentation I did at Web Summit because it kind of supports our story of moving toward customer value being the driver of product strategic questions. And the talk is about a specific approach to doing prototypes, which is very inspired by design thinking principles. But it's not like it's an approach that we're going to like embrace tomorrow and put into operation at Magnolia. So this is more meant as an inspirational talk. So as some of you may know, I'm 39 years old and I just learned to drive. And I'm not really into cars at all, so everything about cars is really new to me, which is a surprise to some. But coming from Denmark, it's a pretty common thing, and in fact, I kind of can't really. I can't really tell the difference between a fender and a bumper. That's kind of my level of knowledge about cars. I'm utterly clueless about cars. But I'd still like to talk about cars. So, are you into cars? Are you? No? Lars? Just driving. Okay. So I'm just really not into cars. But again, since I come from Copenhagen, it's not completely. It's rather normal to be 39 and not have a driver's license. It's very different in other places, in other countries, of course. But for someone like me who comes from Copenhagen, it's fairly normal. And I don't know if you've been to Copenhagen, but there's a reputation about Copenhagen being super bike friendly, and it is kind of true that we do a lot of things when it comes to promoting bike culture. And this is a wonderful place in Copenhagen where you can kind of go around on your bike or your skateboard in this area. It's a huge area where there's a lot of opportunity to do kind of go around on your bike or your skateboard or your roller skates on these hills made by Bjarke Ingels, the Danish architect. And it's just nice to experience for someone like me coming from Copenhagen to see that there's a lot happening when it comes to bike culture in Copenhagen after some years of relative standstill. So as you know, I work in this place here when I'm not back in Copenhagen. It might not be a total surprise to you guys. But I have, since my family is back home in Copenhagen, I have a bit of time when I'm here in the evenings to explore new things. And even though I'm not into cars, I just kind of stumble into something called concept cars like half a year ago. And all of a sudden I had just totally exhausted YouTube for documentaries about concept cars, which struck me as really odd because I'm not into cars, and then all of a sudden I was watching car documentaries all the time. And just realizing that I was watching, car documentaries while coming from Copenhagen, being totally into bike culture was just a strange experience. But it's not a regular type of car that I was interested in, but these things called concept cars. This is called a Y job, which is considered to be the first concept car made in 1938. And if you are into cars, you would immediately see that this is totally different from anything else that was produced at the time. So, so this talk is about what we can learn from what is called concept cars and how it differs from the prototyping that we use in a company such as Magnolia. And I think there's a really important difference between two types of prototyping here, because you could ask yourself, isn't concept cars just a fancier way of doing what we call prototypes when we do prototypes in software development? And to me, there's just something really pivotal hidden inside the concept of concept cars. And that's what we'll explore today. But back when I started researching concept cars, I hadn't come to that realization yet. So I could, well, let me put it this way: because I'm not into cars myself, it's kind of easy for me to look behind the concept of concept cars, because when you talk to people about concept cars, and if they're really, really into cars, all they see are these shiny objects, and they kind of obsess over details about the cars themselves. But I have a different view on cars, which I'd like to take advantage of. So I simply just decided some time ago that I wanted to know everything there was to know about concept cars. Watching all of these documentaries about it, trying to understand what kind of system is it that the automobile industry is using to promote these fancy cars or concept cars, and I was just also asking myself, why are they really spending that much money on producing cars that cannot be driven? Because that's kind of, if you don't know about what concept cars, what it is, it's a industry-wide concept for how to produce conceptual experimental cars that cannot be driven, or typically they cannot be driven, or at least they're not allowed on roads. So I started going beyond this my normal world of software development, and I started going out to interview concept car designers, like this guy who's called Kalle Nordbo from Denmark. And I began visiting several designers of these extraordinary prototypes. And what really intrigued me was that there's just a fundamental difference between these prototypes that we normally do and the concept cars. So again, a concept car is kind of an instrument that the automobile industry uses to explore different ideas in a free format, where they're not like tied to legal regulations, for example. That's what we'll explore in more detail. So they create these extremely imaginative cars or concept cars that are totally different, or typically totally different from their production lines. And they range from cars that are or concept cars that are very similar to the end result that they'll put into production, like the one you see here on the top, the blue cars. There's not a lot of difference between those two, and it ranges again to something that's much more drastic when it comes to moving from the concept car to the end result. So this is one of the wildest examples of a concept car I've been able to find. This is a completely crazy vehicle which has a nuclear-powered engine on the back. Obviously not put into production, but just to give you an example of how crazy it can be. And there are even more batty out there designs. You can find all kinds of crazy concept cars, which the automobile industry has put a ton of effort into. There's also this example, which I think is really great, super time typical, with the visors here and wonderful clothes and everything. It's a pretty amazing concept. So here we're looping back to the 1930s. This is an Aston Martin, and nowadays, well, the concept of concept cars has definitely developed, but there's a lot of it which is the same. And this is an example of an auto show, obviously. And for car geeks, they would typically look at the cars themselves, of course, because that's their interest. But I think there's something quite amazing happening between the cars in the conversations that people have about these concept cars, which you can only have when you're looking at a concept car, because it kind of enables the car manufacturers to have conversations with their customers about ideas and trends instead of very specific production line cars. So I think, to me, the interesting part of an image like this is not really the car itself, but it's the enthusiastic approach of the geeks surrounding the car. These are customers that are so interested in having conversations about this car, which I find quite amazing when it's not a product you can actually buy. So concept cars also means that the auto industry has a much more like limitless room or space for experimentation. Like this, it's almost like a skeleton that they've just put onto the body and put a couple of wheels underneath it. You see this example, for example, here, where you have a small vehicle which is used for like dense traffic, which can go around quickly on streets with a ton of traffic, and then the small car can get inside the bigger car, and then you can drive the big car for longer stretches at higher speeds, for example. So this speaks a lot about how Suzuki, the company, thinks about mobility. And there's also something quite interesting here when you look at how the automobile industry is using the concept of concept cars, because this is also about internal pride. This is an internal presentation from BMW, where they're just showing the employees their new concept car. Again, something that is not sold, but there's a ton of enthusiasm around these concepts inside the company that produces them. So this is again from BMW, where they can kind of test completely radical new ideas and concepts. This is a car without wheels, where these geometric shapes kind of move in a pattern instead of the vehicle actually having normal wheels. So it's a means for how they can for how the company can experiment wildly without giving any promises about what they'll eventually deliver. So concept cars are really designed to release a highly emotional impact from the audience, or from the people who see the vehicle, and that what is interesting here is also that they kind of take concepts from the concept cars, or ideas or elements of the concept cars, and then they let that drip into production models, which I'll also go through in greater detail later. So another aspect that I found looking at the auto industry was that they also use it for retention. So it's a great tool for hiring the best people in the industry, because they are giving you the chance to let you work on a completely wild dream project. Who wouldn't want to do that? So what's the difference then? I'll speak a bit about that. And This is an image of an example of the regular prototyping process you follow toward the end product at the goal. So you go through a series of rapid prototypes, and then you get to the optimal sample or the optimal prototype that you then make into a sellable product. So if we look at these and compare them a bit, the prototypes on one hand and the concept cars on the other side. I'll go through normal prototyping first. So if you imagine this is a regular rapid prototyping process where the bottom triangles are the candidates, or they're not the candidates, but the prototypes. They're rapid prototypes. It could be a website or any other kind of product where you do a lot of small, super fast prototypes that then turn into candidates, and then at the top you have the sellable product. That's kind of the normal prototyping process. So that means that you have rapid prototypes on the bottom, you have candidates, you have one product. In other words, you throw out a ton of things because all of the prototypes and candidates are essentially become trash. And then you have one valuable thing at the top. In order to do or to work with innovation, a lot of companies try to approach it this way, that they have their classic product line, and then they form an internal disruption unit which is allowed to build something completely different on the side, which wouldn't have the legal limitations or restrictions of any kind. Then you can kind of just make a team run wild and do a completely different take on your normal product. But it still follows the same approach of prototypes to candidates to a sellable product. Whereas concept cars function completely differently. So in the middle here, the white triangle is the concept car, and the four black triangles at the top are sellable products. So what the automobile industry is doing is that they take multiple trends and ideas and technologies and designs, and then they pack that into one concept car. And then afterwards, they can use stuff in a complete line of products. So it turns into multiple products. So there's a concept and there are multiple products. And trash is basically limited to the concept car, whereas production line cars obviously all have value. So the idea is that you kind of atomize or explode the concept car into multiple sellable products. So if we look at them side by side here, what is going on is that rapid prototyping means that you're installing design thinking principles such as failing fast, and you also want to get to market fast. That's kind of the underlying principle. And it turns into one product based on all of the prototypes. Concept cars are super different because with them you succeed slowly. It takes an awful lot of time to produce a concept car. So there's a very slow market entry, but you do things more thoroughly and you end up with multiple products instead of one. So this is Kalle Norbo who showed me how, or he tried to illustrate how one part of the front of a car was later reused across a whole series of products that became sellable and valuable to the company. And it also kind of packed in this one design element that came from a concept car, showed the identity of the car across a whole line of sellable production cars. So this is the what is called the Tomahawk from Dodge, and which has a hypothetical top speed between 480 and what is it, 680 kilometers an hour. It's a completely crazy concept vehicle that Dodge built. And naturally, it looks like a motorcycle, but it actually isn't because it has 4 independent wheels that function independently of each other. So what is really, really important or interesting to me about the concept of concept cars is that it lets a company explore without their normal or beyond their normal category. So this is an example of Dodge saying, okay, what would it feel like if we created something that's just completely different to our normal production line? And also, what would this make the end user feel like? There's also a lot about the emotional qualities or engagement with a product that you can experiment with in a concept car that you would not be able to do in a regular prototype, because the prototypes we normally build in software, for example, are super low fidelity. So it's very difficult to get the emotional aspect tested. So you can't really put forth a prototype and say, what does it feel like to use this prototype, because it's so lo-fi, whereas this actually, you can sit on it, you can get a feeling for how it works. So what I'm trying to get across here is that there is actually a lot of value for the auto industry in creating something that cannot be sold. And it's intentionally made that way. And I think in the digital space, we're sometimes too focused on what we call the MVP, or the minimum viable product. On failing fast and on producing prototypes that are all meant to lead to one sellable product as soon as possible or as fast as possible. And I think it really stems from, in the digital world, that we've had the opportunity to reinvent everything ourselves, and we've kind of failed to look beyond our own industry. And it turns out that there is a great concept for how to do exploration beyond just doing prototypes like we do in software. So how can we use this elsewhere or outside of the car industry? I'd like to talk a bit about that. And I started to asking myself the question, how could we apply this? Or what would it mean if we tried to do this in software? What if we kind of started creating digital products with this mindset? Just think about that for a moment and leave the goal of getting a product into a sellable, marketable state as soon as possible. What if we look at it this way, that we reimagine the travel experience, for example? That's what some people are trying to do with doing combinations of cars and airplanes. So this can take you wherever you want, and you can just collapse the wings and go on the highway with that. That's the dream inside this product. It's not really feasible at the moment, but you can use it to experiment. And I was asking myself, what would it be like if I started doing software that way? Or if we approached it that way? Like if we took, what would happen if we took the concept of concept cars from the auto industry and applied it to software? So imagine that this is your comfort zone in your organization. For us, this would be like our CMS, digital experience platform Sphere. We all know how that works. And concept cars enables you in a much more risk-free way to experiment outside of your comfort zone. Because when you don't have to go to the board, for example, and ask them to try out a completely different type of product, because that's a huge risk to a company. But it's quite easy to say, let's do concept software, which is beyond our normal realm of software or of content management, because that's kind of risk-free. You can just put that out there and get people's reactions and see how it would work and what it would feel like. But it needs to be fairly high fidelity in order to work. And in the case of Magnolia, I was thinking, well, we do Internet of Things. What would it be like if we did a physical product? That would be like taking it a step further, of course. What if we found value in having a watch or sensors or whatever connected to our beacon management? And it's not to say that, I'm not trying to say that that is a good idea, but it's a way, the concept cars are an approach where you can test things out like that in a more risk-free way. So, as some of you may know, I used to dance classical ballet many years ago at the Royal Danish Ballet Theatre. And I did that for many years as a teenager. And while looking back at that, I've often asked myself the question, what can software or what can business-to-business software really learn from the arts? And or what can technology learn from the arts? Or to go even further, what can enterprise business-to-business software learn from the artistic processes that govern the creation of art? And it's a key principle in the arts that you set the stage for exploration, and you don't know exactly what the end result will be like when you start the process. But you are completely certain that you have to reach a very, very high level of quality. And art knows a lot about how to do that. And I started thinking that concept cars is actually a way to embrace that mindset, because you are able to do exploration in a fairly systematic way inside a company that is otherwise governed by rational processes. So I've begun writing about what I call concept software, trying to figure out what it would really mean in practice if we took methods such as what is used by the auto industry, took that into software. And I think it seems to be kind of a misconception or a wrong credo in the digital space that you have to get to the sellable product as fast as possible. And we hear that all of the time, but it actually also limits your possibilities if you want to get to the sellable product as fast as possible. So what Kalle Norbo, the car designer or concept car designer I spoke to, said was that sometimes you have to really stop and take a deep breath, because the speed of getting something to market just isn't everything. It's just not enough, and the automobile industry has shown that for the last 60 years, that there is a completely different way to work with prototypes. So I've been talking about, or I wanted to say that I don't imagine that we should make such a process a playground in an organization, but rather do it in a systematic way, the way it's done in the auto industry. And I think there's a ton to learn beyond the digital space, and we've spent the last couple of decades on kind of reinventing everything ourselves, but it turns out that there are great concepts such as the method for how to build and market through concept cars, which are just totally available, that you can pick up and use in digital. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to say thanks.
How difficult is it in small companies to have that sort of imagination to...
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, because in the auto industry, concept car projects are huge projects. So, and they're definitely extremely expensive for them to do. They can get value out of that because it's even more expensive and risky to produce a completely new car. But what would it be like to do it in a smaller company? And I think if we imagine it happening here, for example, at Magnolia, I would imagine a concept software booth at our conference, for example. I could easily see that working, where we took kind of one of our proof of concepts or prototypes and turned it into a thing that you can play with as a customer visiting one of our events. That would be fairly straightforward to do. And what the benefit would be that our sales representatives or our product development people could have the kinds of conversations that you saw with cars about something more tangible. Because often when we do research interviews, for example, with customers, it gets extremely abstract. You're asking customers to imagine pretty wild things that are so not tangible at all. But having something like in front of a computer where you can sit down and actually try the thing would be quite valuable, I think. So I think it does apply to smaller companies as well. All right, let's wrap up.